If someone had told me a year ago that the hole in my roof would be the best thing that ever happened to me, I would have suggested they seek professional help. My life was a carefully curated collection of quiet routines. It was a fortress built of solitude, and I was its king, its sole occupant, and its willing prisoner. I liked my fortress. It was safe. The walls were made of books and deadlines, and the low hum of my computer, and the windows faced a world I was content to merely observe, especially the window in my office. It had the perfect view of my neighbor's yard, not in a creepy way, or at least I told myself it wasn't. It was just anthropological, an observation of a different species. The species in question was Julian. Julian, the neighbor's son. He wasn't a boy. Not anymore. He was a man built of things I was not. Solid muscle, quiet confidence, and effortless competence with the physical world. He was a contractor, and his truck, a beast of steel and mud, was a frequent presence in his mother's driveway next door. He'd arrive with the rumble of a minor earthquake and depart the same way, leaving behind the scent of sawdust and gasoline. I watched him for years. I charted the seasons by the tasks he performed. In spring, he tilled his mother's garden, his back a study in control power. In summer, he fixed her fence, the rhythmic pound of his hammer a counterpoint to the buzz of the cicadas. In autumn, he climbed a ladder to clear the gutters, his form silhouetted against the bruised purple sky. In winter, he shoveled her walk before the sun was even a rumor, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He was a physical fact, a constant, predictable presence just beyond my glass. And from the safety of my fortress, I developed a longing so vast and so secret it felt like a second, phantom heart beating inside my chest. It was a foolish, silent ache for a man who didn't know my name. He probably didn't even know I existed, this quiet man in the house next door who seemed to live entirely through his glowing screens. The distance between us was more than just a wooden fence and a strip of manicured lawn. It was a chasm. He was out there, in the sun and the dirt, creating and repairing. I was in here, in the filtered light and conditioned air, arranging pixels on a screen. He was a declarative sentence. I was a footnote in parentheses. He was real, and I was a ghost haunting my own life. My routine was my armor. Wake up, coffee, work, lunch at my desk, work, dinner alone, read, sleep, repeat. It was a loop, a closed circuit that kept the world at bay. It kept risk at bay. It kept the possibility of a heart, my real one, getting broken safely locked away. Julian was the one variable I allowed, a splash of unpredictable color in my grayscale existence, but only when viewed from a distance. Up close, I was sure the sheer force of his presence would incinerate me. I imagined conversations, hundreds of them. I'd be in my garden, a hypothetical garden, as mine was mostly weeds, and he'd lean over the fence. He'd ask about a plant. I'd answer with some witty, charming bit of knowledge. He'd smile, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes, which I imagined were the color of moss or wet earth. We'd talk. It was a pathetic little fantasy, and I knew it. In reality, on the rare occasions we were both outside at the same time, I would practically dive back into my house, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He was, from my vantage point, the strong, silent type, maybe even arrogant. He had a way of looking at a problem, a sagging porch step, a stubborn engine, with a focused intensity that bordered on a scowl. He never seemed to need anyone. He was an island, entire of himself. And I, a man whose defining characteristic was a perpetual state of low-grade anxiety, found that terrifying and magnetic, utterly, hopelessly magnetic. Then came the storm. It wasn't just rain. It was a biblical deluge, a tantrum thrown by the sky. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and the rain came down in sheets, blurring the world into a watercolor mess. I love storms, usually. They were the perfect excuse to retreat even further into my fortress, to wrap myself in a blanket and feel safely insulated from the world's chaos. This time, the chaos came for me. There was a crack, a sound so loud and violent it felt like the sky itself had split open. It It was followed by a sickening thud that shook the entire house. My heart leaped into my throat. I crept to the window, peering through the river of rain streaming down the glass. A massive oak limb, ancient and heavy, had been torn from the tree in my front yard. It was lying across my roof like a fallen giant. And then I heard it. A drip, 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 drip. The sound was small, but it was the most menacing sound I had ever heard. I followed it to my office. A dark, ugly stain was blooming on the ceiling, directly above my workstation. And from the center of it, a single drop of water gathered, swelled, and fell, landing with a soft splash on my keyboard. My fortress had been breached. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I scrambled for a bucket, then another, as more drips began to fall. I called my landlord, a man whose interest in his property extended only as far as cashing my rent check. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. I left a frantic, rambling voicemail. I tried to look up emergency roofers, but the power flickered and died, plunging me into a dim, terrifying twilight. My phone had 2 bars of service. My carefully ordered world was dissolving into chaos. I spent the next hour in a state of escalating dread, listening to the relentless drumming of the rain on my roof and the ever-quickening rhythm of the drips into the collection of pots and pans I'd scattered across my office floor. It felt like the house was bleeding. It felt like I was bleeding. Through the window, I saw a light next door, a flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. It was Julian. He was outside, in the thick of the storm, securing a tarp over his mother's prize-winning rose bushes. He moved with a calm, unhurried purpose that seemed like a personal rebuke to my own spiraling hysteria. And then my phone buzzed. A text from his mother, Eleanor, a sweet woman who sometimes left cookies on my porch. "Leo, dear, are you all right? Julian saw that awful branch on your roof. Do you need help?" My thumbs hovered over the screen. Pride, fear, and desperation wrestled inside me. Asking for help was not my strong suit. Asking him for help felt like asking the sun to please stop shining so brightly, because it was giving me a headache. It felt impossible, but the dripping was getting worse. "The roof is leaking. Badly." I typed back, my fingers clumsy. "I can't reach my landlord." The reply was instant. "Julian is coming over." My heart stopped. Then it started again at triple speed. He was coming over. He was going to cross the chasm. He was going to walk right through the gates of my fortress. And I had no idea what to do. I ran a hand through my hair. I looked at my clothes, an old t-shirt and worn sweatpants. I looked at the mess of pots on the floor. There was no time. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that cut right through the noise of the storm. I opened the door, and there he was. He was even bigger up close, broader in the shoulders, taller than I'd estimated. Rain slicked his dark hair to his forehead and ran in rivulets down his face. He was wearing a heavy-duty rain jacket, but he still looked soaked. He wasn't scowling, not exactly. His expression was one of intense focus. Those eyes, the ones I'd imagined, were the color of dark, wet stone, and they were looking directly at me. "My mom said you have a leak," he said. His voice was deeper than I'd imagined, a low rumble like his truck's engine. It wasn't unkind. It was just direct. "Ah, yes." In my office, I stammered, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. I stepped back, and he entered my house. He brought the storm in with him, the smell of rain and wet earth and something else, something that was just him. It filled my small hallway. It filled my entire world. My fortress felt suddenly, impossibly small. He followed me to the office, his heavy work boots making solid, confident sounds on my hardwood floors. He took in the scene, the constellation of cookware, the stained ceiling, with a quick, professional glance. He didn't say, "What a mess," or "You should have called someone sooner." He just nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's see what we're dealing with. Where's the attic access?" The next hour was a blur. I was his reluctant assistant. He moved through my house with an easy command that I could only envy. He was all quiet competence, while I felt like a collection of clumsy limbs and frayed nerves. I handed him flashlights. I held ladders. I stayed out of his way, and I watched him. I could not watch him. Now that he was here, in my space, the details I could only guess at from my window were thrown into sharp relief. There was a faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His hands, which I had only seen gripping tools from a distance, were calloused and capable, but the nails were clean. There were faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He wasn't an arrogant god of manual labor. He was just a man. A tired man, working in a storm to help a stranger. He needed to get into the cramped crawl space above my office. It was a tight fit. He pulled himself up, his muscles flexing under his damp shirt. The space was dark and suffocating, smelling of dust and old wood. I stood on the ladder below, holding a heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a path through the thick, dancing dust motes. "Okay," his voice echoed from the darkness above. "Hand me that pry bar." I picked it up. It was heavy, cold steel. I reached up into the black square of the attic opening. He reached down, and for a single breath-stealing moment, our hands brushed. It wasn't much, just the rough, warm skin of his fingers against the back of my hand. But it was like a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity shot up my arm, straight to my chest, where it set off a riot. My heart stuttered, a frantic, panicked drumbeat against my ribs. Heat flooded my face. It was absurd, a reaction completely out of proportion to the event, but it was undeniable. It was the first time we had ever touched. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. I probably imagined the slight pause before he took the tool, the flicker of something in the darkness. Or maybe I didn't. My mind was a chaotic storm, mirroring the one outside. He felt it. He must have. No, don't be an idiot. It was nothing. An accident. Stop thinking. Just stop thinking. He was quiet for a long time after that. The only sounds were his muffled movements and the groan of old wood. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "It's worse than I thought. The branch punctured the sheathing. You're going to need a whole new section patched in. I can tarp it for tonight to stop the worst of it, but this is a real job." He lowered himself out of the attic, landing on the floor with a soft thud. He was covered in dust and cobwebs. He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging a piece of insulation. For the first time, he looked less like an unflappable force of nature and more like a man facing a complicated problem. He looked vulnerable. "The problem," he said, staring at the water-stained ceiling, "is that to do this right, I need to see the original framing plans. These older houses can have weird truss systems. Without the blueprints, I'm just guessing, and I don't like to guess. My landlord was a black hole of information. He wouldn't have the blueprints." A fresh wave of despair washed over me. "I don't have them," I said, my voice flat. Julian sighed, a sound of deep frustration. He was at a dead end, and in that moment, something shifted. The power dynamic, which had been so clearly defined. He, the competent rescuer, I, the helpless victim, suddenly leveled. He had a problem he couldn't solve with a hammer. But I could. "Wait," I said, a flicker of an idea cutting through my anxiety. "Maybe I can find them." He looked at me, skepticism clear in his tired eyes. "Ow!" "The county archives," I explained, my voice gaining confidence as I moved into my own area of expertise. "Property records, building permits, it's all digitized now, if you know how to navigate the database. The original plans would have been filed with the initial construction permit. I led him to my main computer, the one that hadn't been rained on. I sat down, my fingers flying over the keyboard, navigating arcane municipal websites with a speed and fluency that was my equivalent of him wielding a circular saw. He stood behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I could smell the rain and the sawdust and that unique, masculine scent of him. It was intoxicating and terrifying. I tried to focus on the screen. His presence was a physical weight behind me. I was acutely aware of every breath he took. I could feel his gaze on my neck, on my hands as I typed. My own breath was shallow, my heart still performing its frantic gymnastics. After a few minutes of navigating labyrinthine menus and archaic search functions, I found it. A scanned PDF of the original blueprints for my house, filed in 1972. "There," I said, my voice a little breathless. I clicked to open the file. He leaned in closer to see the screen. His head was next to mine. His arm brushed my shoulder. This time the contact was sustained. A solid, warm pressure. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I could feel the rough fabric of his jacket, the solid muscle beneath it. I could see the individual drops of water clinging to his eyelashes. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. "I'll be damned," he murmured, his voice a low rumble right next to my ear. "You found them." There was a note of genuine surprise, of respect in his voice. "I've been fighting with that stupid county website for years." He didn't pull away. He stayed there, leaning over my shoulder, studying the digital blueprint. And in that moment, something new sparked between us. A flicker of partnership. I wasn't just the guy with the leaky roof anymore. I was the guy who could navigate the digital world that baffled him. I had helped him. We were, for the first time, on equal footing. The storm raged on for 2 more days. The power remained stubbornly out. My house, usually a sanctuary of solitude, became a shared space, a strange, candlelit island against the deluge. Julian couldn't finish the permanent repair until the rain stopped, but he worked tirelessly, securing a heavy-duty tarp over the gash in the roof, a temporary but effective fix that silenced the maddening drip. He should have gone home. His mother's house was right there, warm and dry. But he stayed. He said he wanted to keep an eye on the tarp, make sure it held. I knew it was an excuse. I didn't know why he was making it, but I didn't question it. A part of me, the part that had watched him from a window for years, was terrified. Another part, a braver, more hopeful part, was humming with a strange, vibrant energy. We existed in a strange domestic bubble. We made coffee on my gas stove in the mornings. We ate canned soup for dinner by the light of a camping lantern. We talked. At first, it was about the roof, about trusses and flashing and water damage. But slowly, inevitably, the conversation drifted. The darkness helped. It was a cloak, a confessional booth. Without the harsh glare of electricity, without the distractions of screens and the pressures of the outside world, the barriers between us seemed to thin, to become permeable. The silence in my house was no longer empty. It was filled with his presence, a steady, calming weight. On the second night, sitting on the floor of my living room, surrounded by a sea of flickering candles, he started to really talk. He told me about the pressures of running his own business, the constant worry about finding the next job, about making payroll. He talked about the loneliness of it, of spending his days fixing other people's homes, but never having the time or energy to build a life of his own. "I see you sometimes," he said, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed on the dancing flame of a candle. "Through your window. You're always in there, at your computer. You always look so focused." Content, the irony, was a bitter pill in my throat. Content. I was the king of a lonely fortress. "It's just work," I said. "It's quiet." "I like quiet. I don't think I know what quiet is anymore," he admitted, a weary honesty in his voice. "My head is always loud. A list of materials, measurements, invoices." He looked at me then, his eyes dark and serious in the flickering light. "What is it you do exactly?" I told him about being a graphic designer, about logos and branding and the endless, frustrating dance of client feedback. He listened. He didn't just pretend to listen. He actually heard me. He asked smart questions. He was genuinely curious about my world of color palettes and typography, a world so alien from his own. The confession tumbled out of me before I could stop it. The words felt clumsy, heavy in the charged air. "You know," I began, my heart starting its familiar, frantic rhythm, "I always thought I was intimidated by you." He frowned, a genuine confusion on his face. "Intimidated? By me? Why? You just always seemed so capable, so self-sufficient. I always felt like you were annoyed by my very existence. Like my quiet little life next door was an irritation. My face was hot with embarrassment. I couldn't believe I was saying this out loud." Julian was silent for a long moment. He looked down at his calloused hands, then back up at me. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "Annoyed? Lau. God, no, he used my name. It sounded different in his voice. Solid. Real. The truth is," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "I could never figure out how to talk to you." My breath hitched in my chest. "You were always disappearing," he went on. "I'd be outside, and I'd see you, and I'd think, okay, just say hello, and then you'd be gone. Back inside, I figured you wanted to be left alone, that you thought I was just some dumb jock with a hammer. The chasm between us wasn't a chasm at all. It was a misunderstanding, a mirror image of the same fear, the same uncertainty. He had been just as lost as I was. The realization was so profound, so earth-shattering, that it left me speechless. The air between us thickened, charged with everything that had just been said and everything that hadn't been said for years. The rain had softened to a gentle patter on the roof, a soft percussion to the wild beating of my heart. He shifted closer, the movement slow, deliberate. He was breaking the last barrier. He reached out, his hand moving through the candlelit air. It didn't startle me. It felt inevitable. His fingers, rough and warm, cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver through my entire body. His eyes searched mine, asking a question I was too breathless to answer with words. So I leaned in. The first kiss wasn't frantic or passionate. It was a discovery. It was slow, hesitant questioning. His lips were soft, tasting faintly of coffee and rain. It was a quiet, desperate collision that had been years in the making. It was the feeling of a locked door finally swinging open. It was a confession more honest than any words we could have spoken. It was everything, and it happened right there on my living room floor in a small, fragile world lit only by candlelight. We didn't talk much after that. There was nothing left to say. Words felt inadequate, clumsy things compared to the language we were now speaking. He pulled me closer, and we fell asleep right there on the couch, tangled together under a throw blanket as the last of the candles flickered and died, leaving us in a comfortable shared darkness. For the first time in my adult life, I did not feel alone in my own home. I felt found. I woke to the aggressive hum of the refrigerator. The sound, so normal and mundane, was a shock to my system. The power was back on. Gray morning light filtered through the blinds, painting stripes across the living room. It was a cold, clinical light after the warm, forgiving glow of the candles. And I was alone. I sat up, my body stiff and sore from sleeping on the couch. The blanket was pulled around my waist. The living room was empty. The air was still, too still. The steady, breathing presence that had filled the space all night was gone. A knot of pure, cold dread formed in my stomach. It was a familiar feeling, the chilling return of my default state of anxiety. He's gone. Of course, he's gone. What did you expect? My eyes scanned the room, desperate for any sign that the night before had been real. I saw on the coffee table a piece of paper torn from my own legal pad, weighted down by a coffee mug. My heart did a painful little flip-flop. I reached for it, my hand trembling slightly. The handwriting was a decisive, masculine scrawl. Had to get to another job. The rain stopped. We'll finish the roof this afternoon. Jay, that was it. No, I had a good time. No, let's talk later. Just a blunt, practical statement. It was a contractor's note, not a lover's. The warmth from the previous night evaporated, leaving me cold and exposed in the harsh morning light. The spiral began immediately. It was a well-worn path in my mind. The descent into self-recrimination and doubt. It was a mistake, a fluke, a moment of weakness brought on by the storm and the darkness. He was just being kind, and I, in my lonely desperation, had read everything into it. I had forced an intimacy that he was now, in the clear light of day, politely and efficiently retreating from. I made coffee, the motions automatic, but my mind was racing. Every moment from the night before was replayed, re-examined, and reinterpreted through this new, horrifying lens of regret. The way he talked about being lonely, he was probably just venting. The kiss, a moment of shared cabin fever. The way he held me while we slept, pity, maybe. He felt sorry for the pathetic, anxious man whose house was falling apart. The silence of the house was different now. Before Julian, it had been a comfortable, chosen solitude. Now it was an absence, a hollow space where he should have been. Every room seemed to echo with his departure. I could still smell him on the blanket, a faint scent of rain and sawdust that was both a comfort and a torture. I spent the entire day in a state of suspended agony. I tried to work, but the pixels on the screen swam before my eyes. I couldn't focus. My stomach was a churning sea of bees. Every creak of the floorboards, every car that drove down the street, sent a jolt of panicked hope through me. Is that him? It never was. He said he would come back in the afternoon to finish the roof. The thought was both a promise and a threat. I dreaded it. How would we act? Would we pretend last night never happened? Would he be coldly professional, all business, creating a new, more painful distance between us than the one that had existed before? The thought made me feel physically ill. Maybe it would be better if he didn't come back at all. Maybe he'd just send one of his crew members. The thought was a fresh stab of pain, but it also offered a kind of relief. An ending. A clean break from the hope that was now poisoning me. By late afternoon, I was a wreck. I had convinced myself that I had imagined the entire emotional connection, that I had built a fantasy out of a few kind words and a moment of physical contact. I was back in my fortress, but the walls were crumbling and I was exposed and shivering. I felt more alone than I ever had in my entire life. I heard the rumble of his truck pull into his mother's driveway. I didn't go to the window. I couldn't. I just sat on my couch, frozen listening. I heard the sounds of a ladder being set up against the side of my house. I heard his footsteps on the roof above my head. A solid, heavy tread. He was up there, working, fixing the damage. An hour passed. 2. The sun began to set. The sound from the roof stopped. I heard the ladder being taken down. I heard the truck door slam. Then, the engine started. He was leaving. He wasn't even going to knock. He was just going to leave. The job finished, our brief, strange intimacy packed away with his tools. A wave of something, not despair, but a sudden, sharp anger at my own passivity, rose in me. I had to know. I couldn't live in this limbo. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked to the front door. I pulled it open, ready to call out his name, to demand something, an explanation, an acknowledgement. But I didn't have to. He was standing on my porch. His hand was raised, poised to knock. He looked wrecked, just as anxious and uncertain as I felt. The confident, capable contractor was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes shadowed, with a familiar worry that I recognized from my own mirror. We just stared at each other for a long moment. The space between us crackled with unspoken questions. "The roof's done," he said finally, his voice rough. I heard. I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. He shoved his hands in his pockets, breaking eye contact to look down at his worn boots. "Leo, He trailed off, sighing in frustration. "I'm sorry about this morning." The apology was not what I expected. "For what?" "For leaving like that," he said, meeting my eyes again. The vulnerability there was staggering. I woke up, and the power was on, and it was morning, and I panicked. I'm not good at this. At what?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely at the space between us, at my house, at everything. Feelings. Talking. Waking up next to someone I actually care about. I didn't know what the rules were. I didn't want to assume. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went to work. The knot of anxiety in my stomach didn't just loosen, it dissolved. It washed away in a flood of overwhelming relief. He hadn't been retreating out of regret. He had been retreating out of fear. The same fear that had kept me a prisoner in my own house for years. I panicked too. I confessed, and the admission felt like letting go of a breath I'd been holding my entire life. When I woke up and you were gone, I thought I had imagined everything. That it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, he said, his voice firm, decisive. "Leo, it was the least mistaken thing I've done in a very long time." He took a step closer, closing the distance between us on the porch. "This is new territory for me," he said. "It's frightening. But I don't want to go back to just watching you through a window. I don't want that either," I said, and the honesty of it felt like a homecoming. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. The familiar jingle was a comforting sound. He worked one of the keys off the ring. It wasn't a house key. It was thick with a black plastic head. The key to his truck. He held it out to me in the palm of his rough, calloused hand. "What's this for?" I asked, confused. "It's for my truck," he said. "I want you to have it." He saw the question in my eyes and continued. "It's a gesture, I guess. So you know you're not trapped. So you know you have access to my world, just like I've had to yours for the past few days. In case you ever need to get away, or, or in case you ever want to come find me, it was the strangest, most beautiful, most romantic gesture I could have ever imagined. It wasn't a declaration of love in a movie. It was something real, something practical, something uniquely him. It was a key, an offering of trust, a promise of access, a tangible symbol of a new beginning. I took the key from his hand, my fingers closing around the cool metal. Our hands touched again, but this time there was no jolt of surprise. There was just a quiet, profound sense of rightness. "Thank you," I whispered. He gave me a small, tired, but genuine smile. The kind of smile I had only ever allowed myself to imagine. "So," he said, his voice a little lighter, "are you going to invite me in? I haven't eaten all day." I stepped back and held the door open wide. "Welcome home," I said, and I realized with a sudden, breathtaking clarity that I meant it. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. The roof was fixed, a solid, seamless patch that would stand as a permanent reminder of the storm that had changed everything. But the real repair work was happening inside the house. Inside me, Julian became a fixture. His muddy work boots found a permanent home by my front door, right next to my own shoes. His heavy jacket was a familiar presence on my coat rack. His truck in the driveway next door was no longer a symbol of distance, but a promise of his return. Our new routine was a stark, beautiful contrast to my old one. We started making coffee together in the mornings. I'd grind the beans while he filled the machine with water, our movements a simple, comfortable dance in the small space of my kitchen. His presence filled the silence, not with noise, but with a sense of peace I had never known. The quiet was no longer lonely. It was shared. We ate meals together. Sometimes we'd cook, other times he'd bring takeout, and we'd eat sitting on the floor of the living room, just as we had during the storm. We talked about everything and nothing, about his difficult clients and my creative frustrations, about our childhoods, about our foolish, secret fears. I learned that his perceived arrogance was a shield for a deep-seated insecurity, a fear that he wasn't smart enough, that his hands were more valuable than his mind. I told him how my anxiety was a fortress I had built to protect myself from a world I felt too fragile to face. We were two sides of the same coin, each of us hiding from the world in our own way. We started sleeping in the same bed. My bed. The first few nights, I lay awake, hyper-aware of his warm, solid presence beside me, terrified that I would do something wrong, that he would suddenly vanish by morning. But he never did. He'd be there when I woke up, his arm thrown protectively over me, his breathing a slow, steady rhythm that calmed the frantic beat of my own heart. The morning after anxiety, that familiar ghost, was finally laid to rest, replaced by a profound sense of security. One Saturday, I sat on my porch, a real porch swing now, installed by Julian, and watched him work in his mother's garden. He moved with the same focused grace I had admired for years from my window. But now it was different. I wasn't an observer of a foreign world. I was a part of it. After a while, he looked up, saw me watching, and smiled that slow, easy smile. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of a dirty glove and waved for me to come over. And I did. I walked across the lawn, that space that had once been a chasm, and joined him in the sun. My old life, the one lived behind glass in a fortress of my own making, seems like a story about someone else now. I had mistaken my solitude for peace, my routine for contentment. I believed my world was complete, that I had everything I needed within those four walls. I was wrong. My life wasn't a complete story, it was a prologue. Julian was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the storm that broke through my defenses, the chaos that wrecked my careful plans and showed me what it truly meant to be safe. He didn't just fix my roof. He rebuilt my whole world, making space for himself inside it, and in doing so, made space for me to finally, truly live. It's funny how we build walls to protect ourselves, not realizing we're also building a prison. Have you ever had a moment or a person come into your life and completely shatter the walls you've so carefully constructed, only to show you a better world on the other side? I think we all have our own version of a leaky roof that unexpected disaster that forces us to let someone in. I'd love to hear about the storm that changed your life. So please, share your own story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey from solitude to connection, consider subscribing for more stories about finding love in the most unexpected places. It turns out, sometimes the greatest adventures begin when you're forced to open the door.